Welcome to G5 Classified, your one-stop shop for all things Group of 5 college football. Stepping up to the microphone are your hosts, Gabe Kuhn and Kyron Samuels. Now, let's talk some G5 football.
We back. How about it? Episode 12 is live and coming at you. Gabe Kuhn, Kyron Samuels with you. G5 Classified is the name. Kyron, what's happening, man? How you doing?
What's happening, man? Happy to be back. We had a pretty big weekend in college football, so a lot to dig into, a lot to talk about. I'm glad to do it.
Yes, sir. And on the show today, guest-wise, we're going to have Jordan Reid. Jordan Reid is the ESPN NFL draft analyst, again, at ESPN. But he's had a hell of a come-up, Kai.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good get for you, but he's had a hell of a come-up. I remember him at Draft Network. He played quarterback at North Carolina Central for some time. But he will join in our guest spot today. But we do have plenty to get to, including, let's start here, week 2 of the college football playoff rankings. I know we promised that we're not going to get angry about these rankings, but it's hard not to be at least a little bit angry. It's hard not to get annoyed with the way the committee is going about their business. I don't really understand what the rule of the, decision-making is behind the scenes. Strength of record, strength of schedule, FPI, RPI, whatever, it all comes into the equation. But it came out as follows. Oregon at number 1, Ohio State at number 2. I don't have a problem there. Where my problems start, though, Kai, are at 3 and 4. Texas at 3, Penn State at 4. Texas, a couple of weeks ago, got their ass kicked by Georgia 30-15. That's their one loss of the year. They had a pretty easy schedule. I think they were 16 out of 16 in the SEC when it came to strength of schedule. But they had a game a couple of weeks ago where Georgia just handled them, but yet they're still sitting there at number 3 in the country. Penn State at 4. They don't have any marquee wins. What'd you think ultimately about how it shook out for week 2?
You know what? The biggest issue I have is with Tennessee. And I think Tennessee dropping 2 spots after winning a game by 20 points over a conference opponent is a little bit embarrassing to me because of the teams that you put ahead of them. You put Indiana in front of them. You put Penn State in front of them. It's only a problem because what did they do in 1 week to jump Tennessee? Tennessee was ranked ahead of them after the Alabama win. Penn State and Indiana didn't beat anybody of note. They had very regular games. Indiana, who I'm a massive fan of, love Signetti, love Curtis Rourke and those guys, scraped by a very average Michigan team. What was impressive enough for them to be bolstered 1 spot and jump a spot? And what is impressive about Penn State's resume, where their best win, they are a 1-loss team, but their best win is either an Illinois team that's going to finish 6-6-ish, or maybe 7-4, or USC, who has a losing record right now. So what about them is so good that you have them above Tennessee, who has quality wins? They have a win over Alabama. They have a win over, at the time, was a very quality win, NC State. So if we're looking at out-of-conference, non-conference opponents, they've dominated non-conference opponents. They did have the hiccup against Arkansas, but all of these teams have a loss. Are you telling me that you're giving Penn State credit for a better loss than Tennessee's best win? I don't like that logic, especially after you had them ranked above them the week before. So that's my biggest gripe. I do think that they're starting to give some other teams some credit. It was nice to see like the back end get some credit, but the top 12 that everybody's really concerned with, still pretty bad in my opinion.
Yeah, like I agree with you. And I think Indiana, like the scraping by of Michigan, first of all, Michigan has good name recognition, so maybe that's part of the reason that they put them up there. And they still have a tough team, even though they're not a good team. Offensively, they're non-existent. But I think that was sort of a makeup, from last week where they were placed. Maybe they wanted to lift them up a couple of spots because all the complaints they got about Indiana and the logo bias that they showed in week 1 of the college football playoff rankings. But we do have a log jam at 10, 11, and 12 with all SEC teams, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Georgia. I got to be honest, man. Like, I agree with the order of that log jam. Alabama handled business against Georgia. Ole Miss handled business against Georgia. You should have the head-to-head matchup mean something, and we'll get to the Georgia-Ole Miss game in just a second. So I'm okay with that. I feel like this should be lifted up a couple of spots, though, just because I look at Georgia. This was a team who came into the year and still has the number 1 strength of schedule. They have number 3 strength of record. They handled your number 3 team easily on the road.
Yes.
And that was a game where, like, Carson Beck threw 3 picks. The offense couldn't really get going in a big way. It's just strange to me. I know that Ole Miss handled business easily against that Georgia team. I get that. But Georgia is still a damn good football team. Obviously, if they beat Tennessee, things will figure themselves out. They'll shake out. But I think the way that they ranked it, that's almost a pseudo playout game. Georgia loses, they're out of contention. Tennessee loses, they're going to be on the outside looking in until a couple of other teams lose that are in front of them. So I didn't really like that part of it, because I think Georgia has earned, certainly over the years, the benefit of the doubt. But also, when you look at their strength of schedule and strength of record, it's inarguable. Number one, strength of schedule. Number three, strength of record.
They have 4 ranked opponents this season, right? First of all, that's only second to Alabama, who has 5.
Right.
Against those ranked opponents, so we can essentially call those pseudo playoff games, right? They played Clemson on a neutral field, blew them out of the water.
Kicked their ass.
Went to Tuscaloosa, right? Classic of the game. Went down, came back, took the lead, needed a beautiful play from Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams from Alabama, that is, to win that game. Then you have the game that they went and played against Texas, blew them out of the water. It wasn't close. It wasn't competitive. I don't care what the final score says. It looks like a 2-score game. On the field, that was a 4-score ass whooping. Was not a competitive game, in my opinion. Then you have the game that they just played against Ole Miss. So let's also keep it to perspective here. The 4 games that I just named, neutral site, 3 road games against top 15 SEC teams. It's by far the most difficult schedule in the country right now, even though Alabama has an extra rank win. Alabama's 4-1 in those ranked games. So I do agree with the pecking order where it sits right now. But you have to give Georgia some credit for this, man. The loss they had at Alabama is a 1-point loss. The loss that they had against Ole Miss was decisive. But you have to look at where they are in the season, man. I think that they're struggling a little bit with health right now. You got to think about, let's look at this too. And this is self-inflicted, so I want Georgia fans to keep this in mind. Ra Thomas.
Yep.
And I'm drawing a blank on the other, Colby Young. 2 guys that were supposed to be major contributors, where they're super lacking right now on the outside and the perimeter at receiver, are off the team by their own doing. I know there's some stuff that's coming out about some of the cases and some of the stuff where these guys may not have been at fault as much as we thought they would, but still, you're not going to get any benefit of the doubt from the public. You're not going to get any benefit of the doubt from voters because, one, you've dominated for so long, so you're not that Alabama standard where you have to be damn near perfect or everybody says, what the hell is wrong with you? 7-2 or 8-2, whatever they are, or 7-2 is what they are right now, is not going to be good in most people's eyes, despite the number 1 strength of record, despite the toughest number 3 strength of record, number 1 strength of schedule. You're just not going to get any sympathy from anybody. And I think that's kind of a disservice to what the 12-team playoff is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be the 12 best teams with the best resumes, in my opinion. Everybody has a debate. What are the 12 best teams or the most deserving teams? To me, it's a little bit of both. You want to get the 12 best teams with the most deserving resumes. I think that should factor into the equation here. And everything, and I'll say this before I pass it back to you. Everybody's complaining, everybody's griping. I want everybody to keep in mind why this thing is in place in the first place. It started about 15 years ago when 2-loss LSU won the national championship with the BCS, and then Alabama losing the game of the century in the regular season and then coming back and blowing LSU out in the all-SEC national championship game kind of really blew the hinges off the door, right? That's why we got the playoff. And then you got the 14 playoff. It was still SEC dominance. And you got the money involved, and now the money's kicking in, and everybody's like, well, we can't leave deserving teams out like Florida State last year. We get the 12-team playoff. And what's the biggest complaint? SEC teams, you have to bolster other resumes. People are talking about SEC bias, but I see 4 Big Ten teams in the top 5, and there's no other ranked team in the Big Ten after that. So what are we doing?
I think the SEC's getting the shit into the stick.
100%.
Quite frankly.
With the most difficult road. And that's my thing. People can say what they want, but if there's 4 or 5 10-2 SEC teams, their resume is going to be far greater than anything from any other conference, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah, and I do think that the committee needs to take into consideration where these, in-conference ranked games, where they're being played for Georgia. They're all on the road. Like, that shit is tough. Ole Miss on the road, Alabama on the road. I mean, I can't really understand why this is taking place the way it is. Georgia is a team who, even still, after losing to Ole Miss, I still think everybody would be terrified of them. They still have a chance to win a national championship if they get into the bracket, but we're questioning if they're going to get into the bracket. And I don't know if that should necessarily be the case. I don't know if that's how that should be. But the reason we're questioning it is because of that ass whooping that they took at the hands of Ole Miss, man. 28-10. Ole Miss, when you look at what they were able to do to sort of nullify Georgia, they had a really good performance from their entire defense. And that D-line in particular, they had 5 sacks. of Carson Beck. And then they only allowed 64 rush yards. And then after the game, you have Carson Beck basically saying we need to get the run game going. That's what I've relied on over these years. You basically have Kirby Smart talking about Ole Miss better than he's talked about any of the opponents they played all year. And they've played Alabama and Texas to this point, and Clemson. He said that Ole Miss is the best, pound for pound talent team, collectively that he has seen all year. I thought it was a very, very impressive win for Lane Kiffin. It completely bucks the trend of Kirby Smart being able to get over top in these types of games and Lane Kiffin falling short in these games. This was a statement win for that Ole Miss program when they needed it the most.
100%. This is the first time a non-Alabama team has beat Georgia since 2020, since the COVID year. Pretty remarkable run. So salute to Kirby and those guys for that. But man, massive shout outs to Lane Kiffin. I want to start with Georgia, though, because I think it's important to put in perspective what happened. To me, I think people are being far too harsh on Georgia when it comes to their defense. Their defense is still one of the best defenses in all of college football.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jackson Dart only threw for 199 yards. The kid, Austin Simmons, came in and looked pretty damn good, so Lane might have his quarterback of the future there. But they rushed for 133 yards, right? But that was on 35 attempts for 3.8 yards per carry. The leading rusher was Jackson Dart on scramble plays mostly. Ulysses Bentley only had 28 yards on 13 carries. Dominique Thomas, had 9 carries for 24 yards. They did a very good job against the run. It's hard for a defense to keep bending but not breaking when you're on the field that much, when the offense keeps putting you in inopportune positions. When they had the turnover, right? They were starting to build momentum and get back in it, get an interception. And that wasn't on Beck per se. I mean, it was a tip ball, tips and overthrows. We hear it all the time. But it's a turnover nonetheless, and your defense has to get back out there and try to stop the bleeding again. I still think they're one of the best defenses in the country. What we're seeing from Georgia here is a lack of perimeter threats. I mean, you have a guy like, Dylan Bell, who in my opinion is a fantastic, I don't want to say gadget player because he does a little bit of everything, but he is a great wide receiver too. He's a great auxiliary threat out of the backfield as a running back. He's done a little bit of everything. He's lined up as some H-back tight end in some sets and some variations. He can't be your wide receiver one, though. You have a guy like, an Arian Smith who does a great job getting down the field, but he isn't open all the time. I mean, people have been, criticizing Beck because he does miss some very easy throws and make some silly decisions trying to force the ball. But these guys aren't running open like they have been in the past. And people have been super critical of Mike Bobo, but they couldn't run the ball either. Nate Frazier, 12 carries, 47 yards, a fumble. Those turnovers kill Georgia in their offensive momentum. So when they are able to get something going, it's been tough for them. But like you said, we have to put it into perspective. They're on the road against Ole Miss. They're on the road against Alabama. They're on the road against Texas. I mean, they are playing the teams that can make you pay for that. People want to talk about the Kentucky game. They squeaked by Kentucky, but if we pay attention here, I'm pretty sure Kentucky beat Ole Miss, right? In Oxford. Yep. Kentucky beat South Carolina, beat the dog crap out of them. Kentucky has more ranked wins than the top 5 of the college football playoff combined. So if we're going to discredit Kentucky,
that's wild.
What are we doing with the rest of these, conferences? So I'm going to give Georgia their credit, say they're still a very good team. Like you said, if they can handle business this weekend, Massachusetts, they're going to win that game. Georgia Tech's not a gimme at the end of the season, but if they're able to make it through the schedule 10-2, still one of the best teams with the best resume, bar none. As for Ole Miss,
go ahead.
No, you got it. As for Ole Miss, it was one of the most impressive showings I've seen all season, and it started in the trenches. My biggest concern was how they were going to hold up on the offensive line. I had no doubt about what their defensive line was able to do. I was not surprised by that in the slightest. What their offensive line was able to do, holding up as well as they did, I was very impressed by, specifically in the passing game. They weren't able to run the ball very well, but in the passing game, they were able to protect and give Dart enough time to either throw the ball or get out of the pocket to make something happen with his legs, which was my biggest concern by far. So I wasn't overly impressed with Dart. I thought he did what he was supposed to do. He had a damn solid game. Their receivers, they have a bunch of guys. Juice Wells stepped up. Austin Watkins stepped up. We have to keep it into perspective with this Ole Miss team. They did that without their number one receiver who's leading the country, leading the country in receiving yards, in Trey Harris. So they aren't even at full strength right now. They have a guy who transferred from Jacksonville State, Chris Hardy, 2-time G5 all-conference, FCS All-American. He can barely get on the field because that defensive line is so damn stacked and so talented. They're dominating. So massive win for Lane Kiffin, massive win for Pete Golden, who we'll talk about later. Ole Miss deserves their credit. I think they go 10-2. They have Mississippi State, and Florida left.
Yep.
And can you leave a 10-2 Ole Miss team out with those wins? You can't.
Yep. And I agree with you. It's the trench battle that Ole Miss, that's what surprised me so much, just winning it. And I know we can talk about the D-line, but if you've been paying attention, they've been playing like that all year. Jared Ivey's been awesome. Princely Umanmielen, as long as he hasn't had that ankle injury, he's been awesome. Walter Nolan's great. JJ Pegues is great. They have some rotational guys that are great. It was that O-line. I said it. I picked Ole Miss in my picks last week, so shout out to me. I'll give myself a pat on the back for that. But my big concern was, can that O-line hold up against Georgia and the rotation they bring in on the defensive line and how many different bodies they have? They were able to hold up just enough. Just enough. Just do enough. That's it. All you had to do was play an average game. They played an average game, and they handled business 28-10. And I will say this, because we talked about it last week, and you just there's a little bit of an insulation there about why Georgia struggled offensively, and it was a little bit of an insulation for the passing game. You said they don't have a bunch of weapons on the outside. I don't want that to be used as some kind of excuse. Still don't want to use it as an excuse for Carson Beck. I don't want to do that, because in the end of the day, Carson Beck still, as the type of player he is, how highly thought of he was supposed to be, and how highly thought of he was coming into the year, he's got to be able to make the throws and do things when the offense is off schedule. He is yet to show that in his entire career. Like when the offense is off schedule, when the run game isn't going, when he's not getting a bunch of help, he's not able to lift up those around him. And we like some of the best quarterbacks we talk about in the NFL draft, whether it's Caleb Williams or, you look at this year, Shedeur Sanders does it. Cam Ward's been able to do it. What they do is lift up the guys around them and they make those guys better. I have yet to see that from Carson Beck. I understand that he doesn't have Vlad McConkey and all those guys, but you got to be able to lift up the people around you, and Carson Beck hasn't done that. Now, you mentioned Georgia. They could finish 10-2 because they have UMass and Georgia Tech at the end of the year, but they have to deal with Tennessee before that. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts, man? I'm just going to put it in. I'm going to put it in your corner. What are your thoughts here?
Well, this is a game that I'm putting all my chips in on Georgia. I'm putting all my chips in on Kirby Smart with his back against the wall, whether Nico plays or not. If Nico doesn't play, obviously that's a positive for Georgia. But even if Nico plays, I think this is a game. They're finally getting one at home where they can shut people up. They can silence the doubters and remind people who they are. And I'm thinking with their backs against the wall, because this is a playoff game, whether we want to agree with it or not, the committee has deemed this is a playoff game specifically for Georgia. Maybe Tennessee, if they go 10-2, can still squeak in. But this is 1,000% a playoff game for Georgia. If they lose this game, there is no SEC championship game. And if they go 9-3, they're probably going to be out on the bubble in that 15-17 range, regardless if they get some help and some other teams lose. So with their backs against the wall, this being a de facto playoff game, I'm going to go with Georgia. I think that they are talented enough. I haven't seen enough explosion from Tennessee's offense. Even against Alabama, they scored 24 points, but that was with 3 turnovers. If they have 3 turnovers against Georgia, I don't think they're good enough to overcome that. I think Tennessee is a very good defense. I mean, I think it's understated how good their defense is. Nobody has scored more than 20 points on those guys, even though Alabama had 17 and they had a couple red zone possessions that they bungled, missed a field goal. Nobody's been able to do it yet. So we have to give them their credit. They haven't played necessarily the toughest SEC schedule, but that changes again. They're going to play a road game against Georgia and have to prove themselves. So this is a prove-it game for both teams, for both coaches as well. I mean, if you want to talk about pressure, Kirby has that Saban pressure on him now, where Saban stepped down, Harbaugh went to the NFL. Kirby was looked at as the guy that is going to be the dominant force in college football. So you have a guy like Heupel on the other end who's kind of like charged with reinvigorating Tennessee's program, which he has done. I'll give him full credit for that. But now Tennessee isn't a fan base that's going to be happy with this. If they lose this ball game and are maybe on the outside looking into the playoffs, they're going to expect you to go win this game. It doesn't matter if it's at Georgia with their backs against the wall. So it is a prove-it game for both teams in a way that we probably didn't see coming into the season. Probably thought that Georgia would be undefeated or one loss at this point. Maybe the Alabama was the game, or maybe Texas was the game people thought they were going to lose. But I don't think many people saw Georgia being 7-2 at this point with their backs against the wall like this. So I'm excited to see it.
I'm leaning to Georgia as well. And the reason I say that is because, like, I think you had a pretty good lean into this game dealing with Ole Miss. I think I think Tennessee's offense isn't near as good, even if Nico plays. So I think you defensively, like looking at another team's defense, you had a pretty good lead in, good edges, really good defensive line. Back end is, so-so, but they get after the passer really well, so it's hard to get the ball off. If Georgia's O-line accepts the challenge, keeps Carson Beck upright more than he was this week, if they're able to establish a little bit running the ball, I think they'll be really solid, because I think Tennessee's a little bit more finesse along that D-line than they are the power of Ole Miss. I'm talking about J.J. Pegues and Walter Nolan. Those guys can blow up just about anything in there. But you also, the linebackers, I think Ole Miss has better ones. Chris Paul Jr. and they have Suntarine Perkins. Those guys really get after opposing offenses. So I think Georgia has a chance here. But again, it's going to come down to Carson Beck. If the going gets tough, can you please step up? Like, that's all I'm asking. Step up a little bit. Make that extra throw. Find a way to throw a ball into in a tighter window. It's just, that's the problem that I think most Georgia fans have with. That's the problem that the entire nation has with Georgia at this moment. So we'll see how this all plays out. But I know how something's going to play out. We saw it last week. 7-2 Colorado, Kai. 7-2. And when you look at the Big 12 standings, they're in second. And here's the road for them the rest of the way. Utah, who has been bad. I think that I'll get to my picks later, and I'm not going to spoil it, but I have a pick later in that game. But Utah at Kansas, Oklahoma State to end the year was going to be a really hard stretch of schedule preseason, but all those teams have losing records at this particular moment. And the way Colorado's playing, it just feels like they can put up points on anybody. Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter can link up and make some things happen. I saw in that Texas Tech game, you finally saw defensively. I know it probably hurt Deion's heart to finally get into his zone, drop into his own defense, but they were playing a lot of man. And then Texas Tech was running pick play after pick play after pick play, go into zone, and all that shut off in the second half. And that's sort of been a trend for this defense the entire year. But this Colorado team, man, here's what they have: Utah, Kansas, Oklahoma State. They win those 3 games, they're ultimately in the Big 12 championship. And if you win the Big 12 championship, what does that mean? That means that you're in the college football playoff
with the bye.
Colorado, brother. And I wonder how people are going to try to move these goalposts. We've had goalposts move constantly with this program. It's hard to move them at this point. They're playing unbelievably good football.
100%, man. And I have to give them a ton of credit. I want to start with the fact that Utah, Kansas, and Oklahoma State are all good enough to beat Colorado.
Yes,
so
they are.
I hope that Colorado, and you know what, I watched the vlogs, and they have a great staff around them. It was a section in the vlog.
Well, can I want to push back real quick. Oklahoma State, you think they are good enough to beat Colorado at this moment? I don't know.
I think they're good enough to make it. If Colorado's not playing at their B or A game,
sure.
Colorado has a stinker, Oklahoma State's good enough, just good enough to beat them. They still have Ollie Gordon, who can have one of those games, and you never know. But I would pick Colorado to win all 3 of these games. So I'm just saying, I like the fact that they are really focused, right? All you hear about this program early in the season, last season, clown show, not serious football team, can't do it this way, can't do it that way. They've done it. I don't want to hear about the Big 12 being, a less than conference, because like you just said, preseason, ESPN, I went back and looked myself. ESPN, Yahoo Sports, On3, all had Colorado as having one of the most difficult schedules coming into this season. So I'm happy that they're where they are. But getting back to that vlog, their defensive back coach, it was a section where they were in the hotel the night before, and somebody in the lobby or in the hotel had been bitching about the accommodations. It wasn't as nice as what they're used to. And he basically said, shut the fuck up. We're here to play football. It's not about what we have. And it was about a 2-minute section where he's just like, I have to get that off my chest. He wasn't even scheduled to speak. He got up there and he was like, y'all lock in. This ain't about nothing else but kicking this team's ass and getting to the next week. And I love that they have people like that on their staff. And people talked about, what they're going to do hiring and what are these people doing here? These guys don't have experience, but they have those guys all play in the NFL, all play high-level college football, all know what they're doing. So I love that. Second thing, I don't even want to talk about the offense. We talked about them ad nauseum. The defense, 10 tackles for loss, 7 sacks in that ball game.
Yep.
Forced a couple turnovers, and then clinched the game with that sack strip touchdown that Shiloh picked up and scored and did the little high step or whatever. So I thought that was incredible from that defense in the second half. Texas Tech is a solid football team. They had just coming off of beating Iowa State the week before. That's a solid football team, man. So I give them a ton of credit for that. Just the mentality, man. They have a deep defensive line. Shout out to Damian Lewis, Big Sap, Dancy, and those guys. They got those guys fired up, ready to play. They have some depth in that secondary, which was picked on last season. I like them top to bottom, man. They have a ton of playmakers, and they're a team that if they do get to the Big 12 title game, that momentum is going to be hard to go against, man. I haven't been overly impressed with BYU. They've been finding ways to win late. But if you're talking about a neutral site inside of a dome where those guys don't have to worry about the elements and you get Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter, LaJohntay Wester, Jimmy Horn Jr. didn't even play. I don't think people have been talking about that. Jimmy Horn Jr. didn't even play, and they were still able to put up 41 points. So I love what I'm seeing from Colorado, and I think that the trajectory of their team is probably going to get them into a 10-2 record if they are handling business and they're on their game.
Yeah. Now, speaking of BYU is the only team ahead of them in the Big 12 standings, but they had a massive scare on the road against Utah in the Holy War. They end up improving to 9-0. 22-21 is what the final score was after a game-winning field goal. But that game was wild. BYU was backed up at one point in the game on that last drive. It was a 4th and 10, and it looked like Utah got the sack. You get the late call. Even though it wasn't a late call, the flag was thrown early. It was sort of late relayed to the broadcast, but it was a defensive holding, gave BYU the first down, extended the drive, and they were able to move on. I want to bring this up because I found it to be just stupid, really stupid for an acting AD to act a donkey like this, to act like a complete ass. But Utah AD Mark Harlan went out of his way after the game because he didn't have to speak post-game. That's not what an AD normally does. He decided to get in front of a mic, and this is what he said. This game was absolutely stolen from us. We weren't excited. We were excited about being in the Big 12, but tonight I am not. We won this game, but someone stole it from us. He did the stop the steal Donald Trump bullshit, and I'm not for that. And to go after the Big 12 in that way is absolutely ridiculous. It's year one. You guys have not held up your end of the bargain, brother. Big 12's probably not happy with you guys in the way you've been playing. You were number one in the Big 12 poll, and you have completely fallen off of a cliff. So you've not held up your end of the bargain on the football field. But in the end of the day, did you see the play where the defensive holding was called, Kai? Did you see it?
Yeah, I saw it.
That was a hold, brother. I'm sorry. It was out of the play. It didn't really matter to the play. It was inconsequential. It was inconsequential, but it was a hold. He damn near tackled the kid. It was JoJo Phillips, number 13 for BYU. He held the shit out of him. That's on the DB coach. That's on Kyle Whittingham. That's on your coaches. You can't hold in that situation, man. And why the hell is he on a into the boundary? Why is he in a one-on-one situation on 4th and 10? What are you doing? Yeah. Didn't look like he had much safety help over the top. And that's probably what made him hold, what made him feel uncomfortable in that situation. JoJo Phillips did a little in cut and then went for the fade ball, and he held the shit out of him, almost tackled him. Yeah, I don't know how you feel about it, and I know I am painting it how I want to paint it, but I thought it was the right call. You can argue you maybe don't want to call it in that situation, but if you're going to call it during the regular action in a game, you call it in that situation as well. It was a damn hold, and Mark Harlan embarrassed himself, in my opinion.
You know, I'll start with this. I think maybe the right message from the wrong person. If anybody says that, it should be Kyle Whittingham.
Yes.
You as the AD going out of your way, especially in your first year in the Big 12, that's not the right thing to do. I tweeted as soon as it happened that Kyle Whittingham should take the fine, and he should be the one to say it in the press conference. I was not expecting Mark Harlan to go do it. Getting to the call, I 100% understand how Utah fans feel slighted. We have to keep it in perspective here. You're 100% right. They haven't kept their end of the bargain. But that don't matter. This is like Auburn, Alabama. This is the holy war. This is BYU versus Utah. This is everything to both programs. That game is bigger than any game they could have won this season, especially when they're having the type of season they're having. So I get it. I just think it was probably the right message from the wrong carrier. I do think that call was inconsequential. I don't think it had any effect on the play. The pass rush was already there. They were getting after him. I think it was a ticky-tack call in that situation.
Oh, I don't know if it was ticky-tack, though, Kai. That's where I'll disagree.
I think it was ticky-tack because they had been letting them play all night, man. It was a physical game all night. They had been getting after each other all night. And is it a hold? It was a hold.
Hell
do I think it had anything to do with the play? Do I think they should have been called in that situation? Do I think it was a call that we see not get called a lot during the season, especially in games like that, in that situation? 8 times out of 10, I don't think that call gets made. 8 times out of 10, I don't think that call gets made, especially on your home field, especially in that kind of a chippy rivalry game. So I I don't like the call, but I do agree with you that he acted an ass, and it shouldn't have been him. If anybody said anything, it should have been Kyle Whittingham.
I think that call, like honestly, if you go play back the tape and get the right, view of it, because you have to go to that sideline and sort of see them stacked on top of each other to sort of get the real view of it. I think in the open game, that's a call 9 out of 10 times that flag gets thrown, because I'm telling you, he latched onto his chest plate, didn't allow him to get away once he tried to break out and go stack him for the fade ball for the 9 round. You can call it inconsequential all you want, but when you look at the flag and what was done, the hold itself, it was 100% a hold from the Utah DB. But again, I agree with you. Ultimately, this is where we can't agree. Mark Harlan, you're not the one that should be doing that. Now let's get into winners and losers for the week. I'm going to start with my winner. I'm going to go with SMU. They didn't even play this week, by the way, but they handled business. I think it was an absolute ass kicking, 48-25 over Pitt a week ago or a couple of weeks ago. But this week you had Miami lose. So where does SMU end up in the ACC standings? They end up at 5-0. They're 8-1 overall. They're the top of the ACC. Clemson has a loss. Miami has a loss. Louisville has 2 losses. Pitt has 2 losses after losing to UVA this past weekend. SMU controls the destiny of the ACC right now. They hold it right here in the palm of their hands. And they have Boston College with Thomas Castellanos in the portal. They have at Virginia, and Virginia's been playing better, but they're not playing all that well. It's still a not very talented team. Then you have Cal to end the year. You have a 3-0 stretch here to end the season, 11-1, year 1 in the ACC, and probably go undefeated in conference in all likelihood, as long as everybody stays healthy. Impressive from Rhett Lashley, impressive from Kevin Jennings, their starting quarterback. Just overall impressive, and they're number 13 in the country right now, or 14 in the country. So shout out to SMU. Even on a bye week, they are my biggest winner.
Yeah, shout out to them. And I'll say this before I get to mine. Kudos to Rhett for having the balls to make the quarterback switch. I know Preston Stone was one of the biggest, G5. A lot of people were talking about him being a sleeper draft pick. Big things were expected from him, and he wasn't playing well, straight out. And he had the balls to make the decision pretty early in the season to give Jennings some reps. And then he said, hey, this is the guy that gives us the best chance to win. So kudos to him. It's paid off.
It was after the BYU loss.
Yep.
Made it immediately. He said we shouldn't lose that game.
Yep.
And went to Kevin Jennings. They've been all the better for it.
Yep. So shout out to them. My winner of the week, and this was a very easy one for me. I texted you this in the middle of the game.
Yep.
Pete Golden, defensive coordinator from Ole Miss. And it's not just for the scheme. I want to give full credit to him for what he does schematically, because I thought he was underrated at Alabama. The entire time people were giving him hell at Alabama was never worse than the number 11 defense in the country. So shout out to him, because he not only stuck to his scheme and found the players for it, he went out and got the best possible players for it. He is the best recruiter in the country right now, in my opinion. If you look at what they did in the portal, those are Pete's guys. Pete went out and got those guys. Pete went out and got a Trey Amos from Alabama, who's going to be an all-SEC corner probably. Pete went out and got a Walter Nolan from Texas A&M. There's other guys that played a part in that, right? But Pete is the recruiter, man. He was one of the best recruiters at Alabama. He's brought that over to Ole Miss, and they're excelling. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the high school rankings, but Ole Miss flipped a 5-star wide receiver, Caleb Cunningham, from Alabama. They flipped another kid, I'm drawing a blank right now, from Florida, who's now going to Ole Miss. They are in talks right now. It's not official. Nothing's happened yet. But Deuce Knight, who's one of the most highly touted quarterback prospects in the country, was a former Notre Dame commit, currently committed to Auburn. Apparently there's real steam there. The Deuce Knight is a guy that can flip. He's from Mississippi. So they have a very good end on Deuce Knight. What he's been able to do recruiting and assembling his guys has been nothing short of remarkable, and you're seeing the fruits of the labor on the field. So shout out to Pete, man. He stuck to his guns. He's running what he likes to run, and he's getting the players to do it. So kudos to him.
Yeah. Now, my loser of the week, you're gonna notice a trend here with our 2 losers. My loser of the week goes to Brian Kelly, head coach over at LSU. And the reason I put Brian Kelly and not just that LSU program after that 42-13 loss, just absolute ass kicking at home against Alabama, where you had 185 yards worth of running from Jalen Milroe, all that stuff. The reason I put Brian Kelly here, he left Notre Dame for one reason and one reason only. He wanted to take his identity and he wanted to supplant it, put it directly in Baton Rouge. And the reason he did it is he thought he would get better talent, better athletes, and all of that to be able to run his type of system, to be able to have that same sort of identity. And he hasn't found that at all. He's got the talent. He's got the dudes. He recruits at a relatively high level, although not as high as he actually thought he was going, highly, not as well as he thought he was going to recruit. But the problem is, you look at his Notre Dame years, and what was great about them? They would run the ball. They would stop the run. They didn't commit a bunch of penalties. They didn't have a bunch of unforced errors. And we could talk about their schedule all we want. It wasn't the greatest in the independents. And we can always have that conversation about Notre Dame. But largely, he was always contending for college football playoffs because his teams did not make a bunch of unforced errors. They ran the ball. They stopped the run. He has not found that identity at all at LSU. And he's made some changes to try to find it. And nothing's happening. They can't run the ball at all. They got absolutely killed. I mean, killed in the run game this week. 300 some odd yards. You had Jalen Milroe rushing for 4 touchdowns on 185 yards. You've even tried to make a switch on the defensive side with Blake Baker coming in. You just can't find that identity. The whole idea of him leaving Notre Dame to go to LSU was have that same identity, except find better players. He's found the players. He hasn't found the identity. And for that, he's my biggest loser of the week. It's embarrassing, quite frankly. You have to have more. You have to show more through the first 3 years at LSU. He hasn't been able to do it.
Yeah, and I'm going to stick to the LSU theme. My biggest loser of the week was Garrett Nussmeier, quarterback from LSU. When you look at what he was able to do coming into the game, right? A couple of weeks ago, people were saying that he's going to be the sleeper pick to be one of the first quarterbacks off the board. He was getting that type of love. He was getting that type of excitement from everybody, right? He gets into the game, looks lost from the very beginning, has 3 turnovers. The first interception was a bad one. I know Deontay Lawson made a hell of a play, but that was the game ended on that play. If they were able to punch that in or even get a field goal and get it to a 21-9 game, Ole Miss has some momentum there. Maybe get a defensive stop, put some pressure on Alabama to score. That turnover killed all momentum of the game. In the first half, the fumble, who do you think you are? Do you think you're Lamar Jackson? Do you think you're Jalen Milroe? You're not the guy to reverse field, try to get the ball out and get out of the pocket. Jahad Campbell comes and sacks him, strip sack. They recover it. Alabama scores 2 plays later with Milroe. Ball game, in my opinion, the momentum was pretty much dead from that point when they went up 21-6, but it was definitely over after that in that red zone interception. And then you come back and you throw another inexplicable interception. I mean, nobody was even in the area but Bray Hubbard from Alabama, who's doing a damn good job, by the way. 2 interceptions in his first 2 starts, but nobody was even in the area. What was he thinking? What was he trying to do? And I really hate it. I'll kind of mix it up here. What the hell were they doing on that last drive against the second and third string Alabama guys? Drake Kirkpatrick Jr., I believe, was in the game. Jalen Mbakwe, true freshman's in the game. And you guys are going tempo, throwing 4 verts, trying to score down the field. And then you complain about it in the post-game press conference, answer the referee saying, oh, they're blitzing 7, 8, 9 guys. There's 20 seconds left. Well, that's because you're fucking running the ball, trying to get a touchdown and get some garbage time points, which your quarterback got a little dinged up. He limped off the field on that last drive so you can get some stats. I hated that. To me, they're the 2 biggest losers of the week. I'm kind of glad that you threw Brian Kelly in there because I just can't believe for a team that is as talented as they are, because they are extremely talented, for a team that has as much recruiting momentum as they have in high school. They have the number 1 player, Bryce Underwood, currently committed, even though there's a ton of talk about him flipping. They've done a fantastic job recruiting. They've done a fantastic job making adjustments, like you said. They went out and hired Blake Baker from Missouri, who I think has done a pretty damn good job considering what they have. They don't have the interior defensive line or the DBs that they're used to having, but they found a way to be in games. They beat Ole Miss. They lost that game early in the season, but I don't think that this team is a team that you can count on to win out. I know there's a lot of talk about maybe a 9-3 LSU team getting into the college football playoff. I am not of the mindset that they went out. I don't believe that they went out at this point. So where they are in their program right now, a lot of stuff needs to be corrected and fixed going forward. And they're my 2 biggest losers of the week. So I'm glad that you pointed out Brian Kelly.
And going back to that program in general, year 3 was when Brian Kelly really broke through with Notre Dame. It's year 3 now. They have 3 losses, and they're not going to make the college football playoff. So I guess my question for LSU fans is, how much more of this do you want to put up with? Like, how much longer do you give this guy if he continues to lose 2 and 3 games a year in the SEC? Yeah. Because LSU fans want more. They want natties. Ed O won a natty. Les Miles won a natty. They expect a natty from this guy.
Yep.
So show me something, brother. You're running out of time to show me something. LSU fans ain't going to stick around and just hope that you finally figure it out. You're on a timeline now, brother. You're on a timeline, and it's not a long one. I can tell you that. Now let's go ahead and grab a break on that note. When we come back, we're going to bring on ESPN NFL draft analyst Jordan Reid. He's next.
So shout out to Scottie Pippen Jr. Thoughts on Scottie?
He has impressed me a ton. I was a little worried coming out of the preseason. I was like, okay, now he's going against NBA guys. The summer league stuff doesn't look like nearly as good. And then in the first game, I was like, it still looks like he's just gambling. He's getting all these fouls early. But credit to him, he keeps getting better. He keeps improving. The maturity is when he's playing behind Ja, I can go gamble. I can try and go get these steals. I can play sort of handsy defense. Because if I get in foul trouble, okay, what are they going to do? Switch back to John Morant? That's okay. Tonight, there are no other guards to come in behind him. Not really. It's for a point guard by committee to let Luke run it a little bit. But he knows he's got to be available. He doesn't get into foul trouble. And I think stuff like that says a lot about a player's maturity and understanding the role you're in on a given night. Dude, he's earned that NBA contract and more. Shout out to the Grizzlies getting another guy on a cheap contract.
Tune in to the Grizz 901 postgame show, live after every Grizzlies game on the Bluff City Media YouTube channel.
Jalen Wells is for real good.
He is. He never looked like he was out of the moment.
Yep.
Took some big shots.
Yes.
Even. And some that maybe weren't as big as shots that he took, but just looked as calm and cool in all situations.
But then we moved him to the starting lineup, and it was like he elevated himself. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like he went to the starting lineup and it was like, oh, I'm out here now with Ja and Jaren. No, it wasn't I'm just out here. It was like, let's go hoop.
Yeah.
It's going to be hell for them. Talking about Taylor and his staff. When Gigi comes back, when Vince comes back, when Luke comes back, when Marcus comes back, when Dez comes back, what do you do with Jalen? This is not, sometimes it's like, well, these guys are placeholders until our guys get back. No placeholder. You're going to have to figure out how do we continue to work him into this rotation.
Tune in to the Night Court podcast with your hosts, Rob Fisher and Brevin Knight, on the Bluff City Media YouTube channel.
We're back and rolling. We have a treat for you today. ESPN NFL draft analyst Jordan Reid has been kind enough to carve out some time. Jordan, what's happening, man? How are you?
What's going on, guys? It's a pleasure being on here, and I've been trying to get on here forever, so I'm excited to be on here to talk some ball.
Well, you've been trying forever, man. We would have taken it any week. Just so any time you want to join the G5 Classified Pod, we're here for it. We're all for
sure.
it.
No, happy to have you here for sure because you've been one of my favorite draft analysts for a while. So I'm happy to see how much success you've had and everything you've done. And I didn't know that you were a former player until about 2 years ago. So kind of talk to us about your career as a player and how you got into media.
Yeah, I kind of just fell into the media space. That's what I tell everybody. I didn't go to school for journalism or, to write or anything like that. I wanted to take the old school route of being a position coach to a coordinator to a head coach to being an athletic director. So right. I originally went to North Carolina Central University, which is a small FCS school, HBCU in Durham, North Carolina. Everybody has heard of Duke before. It's about 5 minutes away from Duke. I played quarterback there from 2010 to 2013. Had a successful career. Still hold the school record for completion percentage. That's the only one that I hang on to now. All these young guys are coming in and breaking all those records. So went there, had a successful career. I was a position coach there for 6 years, coached quarterbacks and running backs. And then after that, we unfortunately got let go. You guys know in the coaching space, things can change very quickly. So we got let go in 2018 and started a family with my now wife. We have twin daughters now. So at the time, they were being born. And just peeking behind the curtain a little bit of a college coach, it is very tedious and it is very time consuming. So I didn't want to be that dad that just wasn't there for her at the time, especially having two at one time. And that was our first children. So didn't want that to be too much on her. So I wanted to figure out a way of how I could still be involved in the game and still be around it in a sense. So took a bit of a leap of faith, and I freelanced for a year, and I just started a Twitter account, and I was just doing scouting reports and voiceovers on YouTube, just doing scouting reports, strengths, weaknesses, and doing about 10 to 15 minute voiceovers. And, I fortunately got on with the company that was a startup company at the time called the Draft Network, and they were looking for somebody that had a coaching background, a playing background, and then of course a scouting background as well. And I forgot to say, my last 2 years at Central, I actually was a recruiting coordinator. So that's really where I found my love for scouting, just talking to guys that came in and out of the building, putting the puzzle pieces together of championship teams. So that was where I really found my love for scouting. And then just fast forward to my time at TDN, I was there for 2.5 years. And then out of nowhere, ESPN just got a random DM one day and say, hey, we're looking for somebody that potentially could be a protege to Mel Kiper. And I was like, man, am I being punked? Like, is this spam? Is this real? I can't believe it. Got an opportunity with that. And like I said, I just fell into the media space, and that's really my story.
All right, now NFL draft wise, how much film do you break down per year? Because you got to watch all these different prospects, all these different games, probably multiple games for a lot of prospects. How much film do you break down a week? As we get into college football, NFL season, and then NFL draft season.
I get this question all the time, man. Like, there is no time limit for as much film
right.
as I watch, just because you're trying to keep up with all these guys around the country. But you have to be strategic about it. And I've gotten to the flow of how I like to watch these guys. And, being a former quarterback, I always like to take a day to watch the quarterback, just because I like to focus on those guys. And out of all the positions that you watch, I'm the one that really likes to watch every single snap of the quarterbacks, just because things change so much throughout the season, from game one all the way through the college football playoff or the end of the season, whenever the last game is. And I'm always the person that likes to watch games in order, just because it's funny with scouting of, if you pick and choose these games that you watch with guys, you could be watching a game where a guy has a bad day, or if he has a good day. Let's say you're only watching 3 or 4 games of, Quinn Ewers or Cam Ward or whatever. You can pick a good game or a bad game, and you can really formulate a positive or a negative opinion just based on those games. So with quarterbacks, that's the only position of where I like to watch every game. But every other position, I usually try to watch 5 to 6 games. That's where I get a good feel of those guys. So it's really an unlimited amount of tape, honestly.
All right, so you're a former quarterback. Holler at me about your quarterback rankings right now. I know they've been published on several occasions. They've changed a little bit throughout the year with new facts and things changing. Well, what do you have right now at the top of that draft when it comes to quarterbacks?
Before you get into it, let me say this.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was really impressed, though. It was about a year ago. I remember I had been talking about Shadur. We've been following each other on Twitter for a while, and you commented that he reminded you of Geno Smith. Yep. So I really thought it was cool that, because there's two sides to Shadur. There's some people that think he's the greatest quarterback of all time already, and then there's people who thinks he's trash and he's only there because of his dad. So it's cool to see you have a little bit of nuance and be able to be like, hey, this kid is probably not the most elite blue chip prospect we've ever seen, but he can be a good quarterback, and he has a Geno Smith type trait. So I got to give you credit for that, because when everybody was polarized one way or the other, I was happy that you were like, hey, this is what this kid looks like. And I think that's a fantastic comp for him.
I appreciate it. And I think the best thing and the thing you have to be as a draft analyst, you have to be transparent, you have to be realistic. But what I kind of hate about player comps is that when you say this player is this player,
right,
people automatically assume career outcome for that player. So I think I put up a Geno Smith tweet today, and everybody was like, oh, it took him 8 to 9 years to be good in the league. And I'm like, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just talking about the traits of the player. So that's one thing I do kind of hate about player comps, just because everybody just assumes that you're saying, oh, this guy is going to take so many years to struggle in the league, or you're just projecting their career outcome, when I'm not really doing that. I'm just comparing the traits of the player that he reminds me of. So just going back to your original question about my order, of the quarterbacks, I think there's a clear top 2 right now. Along with Shador, I would go with Cam Ward, and Cam Ward actually is my top quarterback right now. I know that may be a little bit polarizing, but with those 2, I think there's a ways to go, and I selfishly hope that both of them are able to get into the college football playoff. I think that would really help me differentiate both of those guys. So I think it's more so of a 1A or 1B in a sense right now, but really what differentiates the 2 for me, I just think Cam has more upside than Shador, just because of the physical gifts that he does have. But what I will say about Cam is that the turnover-prone stuff that he does have, those are some of the things that you're just going to have to live with Cam. And everybody's hoping that he's able to eventually eliminate that type of stuff. I don't think it's ever going to happen with Cam.
Yeah.
So for every 8 or 9 good plays that he has, he's going to have those 1 or 2 plays that just makes you go like, what the hell was he thinking on this play? That's just kind of give or take with Cam. But I just like the upside that Cam has, the poise and the calmness that he plays with. And then he just always gives you a sense of hope. And I know they lost that game against Georgia Tech last week, but even though that last drive happened, I always felt going into it like, Cam could engineer this drive to help them come back. And that's always a sign of a potential first-round quarterback to me.
I love that. Let me ask you about Carson Beck, because he's a guy that's been extremely polarized. He's a guy that I had as my QB1 going in ahead of Shedeur of this season because of the baseline. It looked like his floor was so high. And I know he played with some very talented guys in Georgia, but if you were sifting through the film last year, he made him right a lot of times. I mean, he has a lot of high percentage throws in that offense, but when it was time to get to nitty gritty in some of those close games, he played very well outside of the Alabama game in the SEC championship in the first half, because in the second half, he was pretty dang good. So what do you think about the fall off? Because it's kind of inexplicable. I think he's is mostly the same offense function wise. A lot of the same guys are back on the offense. What do you think is the biggest thing that's causing this downturn in play?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I actually had Carson as my top quarterback coming into the year, and you hit the nail on the head as far as the floor. He just felt like a safe prospect. And you're going through his film last year. You love the ball placement. You love the accuracy that he plays with. His footwork is very clean, and he's very decisive. I thought he was very decisive in his film last year. But this year, what I will say about him is that he's really hurting without Brock Bowers and Lab McConkey. And I think that's something that we really underestimated with his tape last year. And they're running the same type of concepts, a lot of one read type of stuff, but he doesn't have that one go-to read like he had last year with Bowers, McConkey, even Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, who I thought was a really good college receiver. And they just don't have those dudes on the perimeter this year. So you're seeing a lot of Jared Goff comps for Carson Beck, and I think that's spot on for him, just because what we're seeing with Carson is that he's just not talented enough to withstand having poor surroundings. And I really love that we're seeing him in this type of environment, just because I think that's going to help us translate him better, just because you have a lot of guys that are able to withstand that stuff, and you have some guys that just aren't able to withstand those types of things. So I think Carson isn't that type of quarterback that can withstand having those poor surroundings. In Georgia, they're just not talented on the perimeter this year as they were in years past. Dylan Bell, they're treating him as their number one guy. Arian Smith, he's just out there exercising. In my opinion, they're just running him deep, and Carson isn't even looking at him down the field. So he just doesn't have those guys on the perimeter. And then outside of a couple of games ago, they just haven't been able to run the football consistently. And I think that's another thing that's been a detriment to Carson this year. So the lack of supporting cast, and then it's just derailed him, just because he doesn't have that strong supporting cast and a strong running game like he had last year.
Now, this past weekend, they got drubbed by Ole Miss, just hammered, 28-10, and they 64 rushing yards, that type of thing. On the Ole Miss side, man, they have a lot of good prospects. They have a lot of good ball players. Princely Umanmielen, I want to know your thoughts on him. And then also, across that D-line, I want to know about Walter Nolan. He's a guy, I live here in Memphis, do my show out here in Memphis. We've been talking about Walter Nolan for a long, long time. Let me know your thoughts on those two guys in particular.
People call me crazy coming into the year, having Ole Miss as my sleeper pick to win it all. And I didn't know if all the parts were going to come together defensively, but if they did, I thought they gave themselves a chance. Just because if you think about Ole Miss, the one area where they have not been good at when it comes to losing to Alabama or Georgia, it's all been defensively. We know Lane Kiffin is going to be able to put up points, but defensively, they just have not been good. Or I should say in the trenches, they just have not been able to hold up against what I call the power guys in the SEC. So this year, I think they've done a good job of being the aggressor. And that's an adjustment that Lane made this year. He said, hey, we're not good in the trenches. Right. We're good against these mid to lower tier types of teams in the SEC. But when we have to play Alabama and Georgia, they're just bigger, faster, stronger, and more physical than us in the trenches. So the area that he attacked this year was specifically the trenches. I don't know if you guys watched that defensive line all throughout the year this year, but they've been playing like this all year. And they have some dudes up front. Jared Ivey is a guy that is really coming on. Walter Nolan is playing his tail off. this year. JJ Pegues is giving them some good snaps offensively and some special packages too. Chris Paul Jr., a linebacker who has been absolutely phenomenal this year. Trey Amos at corner, he's another guy that's coming on really strong. So they have these guys at all different parts on all three levels of the defense that's really come on strong this year. And quite frankly, they destroyed Georgia up front. That offensive line had no idea how to block those dudes up front. And, Walter Nolan, I've seen him live twice now this year. I was there for the Wake Forest game. And, I mean, he's about 6'2", I would say right around 300 pounds. But the player, he's a little bit heavier than him, but the player that he reminds me of coming out is Ed Oliver when he was coming out of Houston. If you remember, Ed Oliver was just super explosive, and he just showed those flashes. Now, I think Nolan's much better against the run, but just talking about just the pure explosion that he plays with is unmatched at times. And he has a couple plays throughout the game where he reminds you, like, yeah, I was ranked the number one player in the country 3 years ago for a reason. And that was always the big issue with him is, could he consistently be that guy from a down in and down out perspective? And I think he's doing a much better job of doing that this year. I have him ranked as my second defensive tackle off of the board. I know a lot of people like Kenneth Grant out of Michigan. I'm a big fan of him as well. I think Mason Graham is in a tier of his own. But when we're talking about when it comes to April, who could be that second defensive tackle off of the board, it would not surprise me if Walter Nolan's that guy.
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember scouting at Oliver. You probably saw me get my ass kicked a couple of times on film. Number 71 from Memphis. Man, his ability, man, to just fire off about 2 feet off the ground on some of those short yardage, plays. And he honestly, he was playing out of position. I mean, he was playing a head up zero back in college.
Yep.
But he was different. Probably the best player I ever played in college. Got to be honest with you.
You're having flashbacks about it right
now. Yeah, I'm
See.
telling you, man. Yeah, there was a 4th and 1 in it would have been 2017, my senior year, where he's lined up at a 2-eye on me, and I have an inside zone to the left. I was playing right guard. I'm just like, there's no chance I'm making this block. I got to put on a brave face, but there's no way I'm able to execute this.
It's funny. I'm kind of glad you segued into Mason Graham because I see a good player. I don't see a top 10 draft pick. I don't see a blue chip prospect like a lot of people have him. I've seen people that have him mocked in the top 2 or 3. Can you kind of talk to me about what you see from him that makes him in a tier of his own? Because I see a very good player, worthy of a first round draft pick, maybe even a mid-tier draft pick. But my comp for him was Kyle Williams, played for the Buffalo Bills, came out of LSU. I think that's a fair comp for his talent level, and nobody would ever dream about drafting Kyle Williams in the top 2 or 3 of the draft. So what kind of makes him that elite blue chip prospect for most people?
Well, I think it's just a combination of the hand power, the lower body flexibility, and then once again, similar to Oliver, he just has those similar to Nolan, he has those flashes of where you just see him quick swim. And I go back to that Washington game back in the national title game a year ago. I mean, he absolutely dominated in that game. And he's had some flashes like that. I think USC, he played really well. He's played well the past few weeks. But I just think he's playing too many snaps. I think that's why we see him kind of disappear at times. But when he's fresh and he has that motor running hot, he looks like that dominant guy. And we just released our NFL comps for a lot of these guys. And the guy that he reminded me of was Christian Wilkins when he was coming out of Clemson. I don't know if he's going to test as athletically as what Christian did when he was coming out a few years ago. But as far as just the flexible lower half, the strong hands, durable against the run, and then just being a mismatch in those single blocks, I think he's very reminiscent of what Christian was when he was coming out of Clemson.
Now, we talk group of 5 football all the time. I want to ask you your thoughts on sort of how you go about evaluating lower level prospects. You get into the group of 5, D2, D3, whatever it is, the film you're watching. I think it's a cop out for a lot of NFL draft analysts to say, well, look at the competition. You dock them for that. So how do you sort through that and ultimately give the evaluation that you think is fair when they're not necessarily playing the best of competition every week?
I think the best advice that I got from one of my mentors, Jim Caldwell, he said, when you're watching some of those lower level prospects, don't even look at their jersey number going into it. Let about 10 to 15 plays play and see if you notice that guy without even looking up his jersey number or anything like that. If you notice that guy, he's probably a dude just because you're noticing his jersey number without even going into it blind, I would say. So whenever you're scouting those lower level guys, just see if they are consistently standing out. And then at the end of the day, talent is talent. Like if a guy has the traits that you're looking for, now I can't tell you exactly what traits to look for. That's really dependent upon you as far as what you like. But as far as if this guy is checking those boxes, as far as the traits or the qualities that you like of that player at that position, talent is talent at the end of the day. And I mean, we're seeing it right now. Quinny Mitchell of Toledo, I think he's playing as one of the best cornerbacks in the league. And he was just in the MAC a few months ago. And he dominated the pre-draft process. But also, this is why I value like those postseason all-star games so much, just because this is the first time where we're seeing a lot of those guys playing against those group of five or those power four types of players, just because we didn't get that experience, just because they're beating up on some of those dudes at the lower level. But those all-star games are very valuable as well. And one of my favorites was Kyle Duggar when he was coming out of Lenoir-Rhyne a few years ago, a small D2 school here. I live in North Carolina. He's right around the corner in Salisbury, and he's dominating that level. He's playing kick return, he's playing safety, he's playing running back. And then he goes down to the Senior Bowl and he does the exact same thing. He ends up going in the second round. So at the end of the day, talent is talent. And if those dudes have the traits that you're looking for, they're most likely going to translate if they're standing out.
Awesome. I love that. I love going down to the Senior Bowl and getting down there for that week. I remember a guy a couple years ago to call my eye was Carl Brooks, the defensive tackle out of Bowling Green. He was a guy that I was like, man, who is this kid? Because I had watched him before. But when you saw him at the Senior Bowl against that level of talent and he's still dominating, I was like, yeah, that's a guy that the eye test matched the production that we're seeing right now in front of us.
I was stunned that he was not invited to the combine.
Man.
Stunned that he wasn't invited to the combine. I still don't understand that to this day.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yep.
One thing about talent, right? You just spoke about talent. There was a ton of it on the field Saturday night in Baton Rouge. And this is one of my last questions, and we'll get you out of here. I respect your time. I know you're a family man, and I appreciate you. But what do you think was the separator in the game from a strictly a football perspective, one? And then two, what did you see from the quarterbacks there? Because it was kind of in the balance coming up. You kind of thought the game would go the other way if you were just reading the tea leaves and projecting going into it. You kind of thought maybe Milroe would have struggled and Nussmeier would have been the guy to have a day, but it was the opposite of that.
Man, I could talk about this one all day just because it actually was my first trip to Baton Rouge. This is my first time going to Death Valley. We called the game, me and my partner Mike Cousins, we called the game on ESPN radio. So we're walking into the game, I'm seeing the gumbo, I'm smelling the gumbo, the jambalaya, everybody's all excited. And, that excitement deflated after about 2.5 quarters. But, the Death Valley experience was awesome, man. It was everything that I thought it was. But I think the differentiator was Jalen Milroe. I think the game plan that Nick Sheridan had from start to finish, I think this is exactly what we wanted to see from Alabama, just being transparent about Alabama. And I've seen them twice this year up close. I saw them against Tennessee and I saw them against LSU. So I saw them at their worst and I saw them at their best. When they're at their best, they're using Jalen Milroe in the design run game, taking selective shots down the field and allowing him to attack in the short to intermediate areas as well. But I think the differentiator was not only him, but the offensive line was outstanding. Like Parker Brailsford was awesome. Tyler Booker was great. Caden Proctor was also great as well. Jaden Roberts got banged up a little bit, but when he was in there, he was really good. When they're running their gap scheme stuff effectively, I don't think there's a better offensive line in the country. Like they physically impose their will from start to finish on those dudes. And LSU, they just quit. They quit in the third quarter. And I said this on radio. I was shocked that Brian Kelly did not at least try a Hail Mary to end the second quarter. I think that was like in that minutes of defeat to me, just because if you remember, they got the explosive play. I believe it was like a running back screen or something like that, but it got called back for a holding on Emory Jones. And they just let the time run out after that. And I was like, man, I cannot believe that they just let the time run out just because they were down, I believe, 21-6 going into halftime. At least try a Hail Mary or show to your team that you're at least trying to compete in this game. It just felt like they just laid down and admitted defeat going into halftime. And then Jalen Milroe, I mean, he was great in that one, man. Whether it was design run game, I thought he was selective with his passes down the field. He could have even had a better day in the passing game. If you remember in the second quarter, Ryan Williams dropped that deep post pass that really could have been a dagger very early on. So I think the differentiator was, of course, Jalen Milroe, and then the offensive line just imposing their will.
All right, now final thing for you, then I'll let you roll. Let me and our listeners know sort of some Group of 5 prospects. Everybody talks about Ashton Jeanty, Harold Fannin Jr. He's been phenomenal over there at Bowling Green. But is there a couple of guys that we're not paying attention to in the Group of 5 level that are really rolling that you think are rising very heavily as we approach the NFL draft?
You went to Buffalo, right? You're a Buffalo guy.
Oh, no. I'm not Buffalo. This is Memphis. This is Memphis right here. We have Memphis.
Okay. I thought
Yeah, Memphis. All good.
I don't know why it looked like a Buffalo.
It's blue. It's
like
blue. I mean, it's same blue. I get it.
You're good. I'm just messing with you. But I mean, there's a couple guys in the MAC. Jerwan Newton of Toledo, who's a wide receiver. I think there's a significant amount of buzz about him. Probably mid to late day 3 guy right now, but I think he could help himself in the pre-draft process. He's one that's really exciting. Harold Fannin Jr. of Bowling Green, tight end. He's putting up ridiculous numbers this year. But there's a linebacker at Buffalo that I really like, whose name is Sean Dolak, who's had 1 million tackles this year. I actually called one of their games this year too. He was awesome in that one. So there's a lot of really good prospects in the MAC this year that I like quite a bit.
Yeah, and then we have, over in the Mountain West, Ricky White from UNLV. They have a couple of guys. Jackson Woodard, I don't know about him. What are your thoughts on Jackson Woodard real quick, just curiously?
He's a good player. I've actually quite enjoyed his film quite a bit. It'll be interesting to see where he does end up going, but I've liked his film quite a bit this year.
Okay, I got you. Well, Jordan, man, I appreciate it. You have the invite whenever you want to, but we will talk soon.
No problem. Thank you guys for having me as always.
You played with Jacob Ravier with the hustle and on the grease.
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, we don't do no Jake hate on this side. That's my dog. I'll be on Twitter, bro. I don't know what I'll be on Twitter seeing everybody hating on Jake. That's my dog.
You ain't never seen me doing that. Who?
Okay, I'm just making sure. That's my dog, bro. I got to get off the Grizz Twitter. I don't know why I see it all the time. But I saw like somebody say that he's played well when he's had opportunity. You know what I'm saying? Consistently. Yeah. Like for me, like when I saw Jake my rookie year, he played well when he was with the hustle. You know what I'm saying? Obviously it's a little different. But he can go. You know what I'm saying? Like he's always been able to go. He's just kind of had unfortunate situations where he got hurt, where he was sick, where he just random things that pop up that has kind of hindered him from playing. And on top of GG and Vince being really good. Now he's getting consistent run, which I said, like, the 11-man is strange, but it's helping him out. You know what I'm saying? It's helping Santi out. Like, it's helping guys out. Pip's playing well. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's good for those guys. They get to do more. This new offense that they've been running has been good for guys to just make plays. You know what I mean?
Tune in to The Anthony Sane Show, Wednesdays and Fridays at 12 p.m. weekly on the Bluff City Media YouTube channel.
And let's give Jacob Ravier a shout out. I know he catches a lot of flack, but he's had a great week since that contract to get renewed. Even that night against Milwaukee, he had a good game. So
since Halloween,
I think he has the highest plus minus on the team, and he's been a plus in every single game since the first loss to the Nets. He's been a positive on the court ever since then. So
I mean, he's been the most. Is it weird that he's been the most reliable guy that we've had out there? The growth that Jake has shown just in a season's length of games is really impressive, and considering how like bad he was, like when he got drafted, it's pretty impressive. Right. It might be one of the most impressive things Kleiman's done.
Tune in to The Daily Grind with your host, Lute Hatmaker, every Monday through Friday at 7:30 a.m. live on the Bluff City Media YouTube channel.
Back in, appreciate Jordan Reid for carving out some time in his busy schedule. I know they work him pretty hard over at ESPN, but glad he was able to join. Now let's get to our G5 check-in for the week. We have 3 teams in the Group of 5 ranked in the college football playoff rankings. At number 13, you have Boise State. Number 24, you have Army. Shout out to them. They have remained undefeated, but they're going to have a massive test coming up against Notre Dame. And then number 25, you have Tulane. Boise State clearly in the driver's seat when it comes to the college football playoff. But I look at this team in Tulane at number 25, and I only have one question. I know they've lost 2 games this year. I feel like it took too long for them to really get that real stamp of approval from the AP poll and ultimately from the college football playoff poll. They've been playing really well all year.
Yeah, 100%. They're a team that I believe their only 2 losses are to Kansas State and Oklahoma, if I'm not mistaken. And they were in both of those games, highly competitive in both of those games. So they're a team that if they can win out and then win the AAC, they're maybe
a chance.
Yeah, especially if Boise State were to lose a game. I mean, if Boise State were to lose a game and then you compare the resume, they'll probably have a more impressive resume, and you have the baseline that they've been pretty competitive with 2 Power 4 teams. So really like what I was seeing from Tulane. Shout out to my guy Cole Hurd, the GM there. He was with me here at Jacksonville State. We're going to get him on the pod at some point. But he's done a fantastic job with that roster, man, getting new guys in there. He's very young, too. He's going to be a name to watch going forward for college football circles. So really impressive Tulane. I think Boise State's still in the driver's seat, like you said. And Army has a hell of an opportunity because if they are able to handle business against Notre Dame and they still have a bolstering resume have an opportunity to bolster their resume against Navy, and if they were able to play for a conference title, they can 100% be in the picture.
I like Boise State. Don't get me wrong. Ashton Jeanty's still doing Ashton Jeanty things. 28-21 against Nevada at home was a little bit strange, right?
Yeah.
A little bit strange. And you have some, you have out of your last 3 games, they're not necessarily ones that I would just write in as a win. You have San Jose State, who's 6-3 on the road. Then you're going to end the year with Oregon State. I want to see Boise State down the stretch of the season. Can they win all 3 of these games, get into the Mountain West Championship, handle business there? I'm curious. They've been a little bit up and down. I didn't like their effort against Nevada. Nevada's a bad team. They're 3-8.
Yeah.
I feel like you should run away with that game, but sometimes a win is a win is a win. College football wins are hard to come by. But I will say their road actually has kind of lightened up. And the reason I say that is when you look at the Mountain West standings at this current moment, you have Colorado State in the driver's seat to make the Mountain West Championship, and UNLV, as much as it pains me to say, because I think they are the second best team in the Mountain West, it looks like they may end up missing out on the Mountain West Championship. But Colorado State has Wyoming, who's not a good team, Fresno State, who's been middling, and obviously they had the Jeff Tedford thing where he stepped away in the offseason. It's been really tough for them this year with his absence. Then you have Utah State to end the year. They should be favored and should win all those games. If Colorado State gets into the Mountain West Championship, it just feels like it's going to be really easy for Boise State to put themselves in the college football playoff, win the Mountain West, maybe even get a bye if the Big 12 sort of puts themselves in a bad position. But I think Boise State's road is easy. I just want to see how they handle that Oregon State game, that San Jose State game before they get to the Mountain West Championship.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And you kind of saw if Ashton Jeanty's not having his all-world, world beater type of performance, that team is still susceptible. I think he still had a very good game, 100%, no question about that. But if he's not beating the brakes off teams himself, that team is a team that can get got, especially if you play a team like a San Jose State who can score points in bunches. We saw what they did against Washington State, who's a top 20 team right now, a top 21 team, I believe. They were able to score points and send that game into overtime. So I think that's a team that could give them a little bit of trouble if they aren't playing their best. So the road has lightened up a little bit. But like you said, man, if they're not on their A game, there are games that they can lose.
And I wanted to bring this up, and I'm glad you brought up the Ashton Jeanty thing, because they have had some struggles when he's not getting to 250 to 300 yards per game. You know what I mean? That's just sort of how it's. They played closer games in those types of matchups. But he's ran for, since game 6, it looks like he has ran for, I believe, 130 against UNLV, 160 the next game, then 209 last week. Yeah. And he's fallen down the Heisman odds. He's fallen down according to FanDuel. He was the favorite a couple weeks ago. Now it's Travis Hunter at plus 120, Dylan Gabriel at plus 320, and Ashton Jeanty at plus 350. Is his Heisman odds drop? Is that a little bit unfair to you? I feel like Ashton Jeanty has gotten sort of unfairly treated these past few weeks. He's still running for 130, 160, and then 209. yet it feels like most people are counting him out when it comes to actually winning the award. I still think he'll be in New York. I think he will be one of the finalists. I think that's written, considering Boise State, their stature in the national picture in college football.
Yeah.
But Ashton Jeanty falling down the odds this much after those types of performances, that just feels unfair. It really does.
Yeah. I will say I don't think it's unfair that he's behind Travis because my position has not changed.
Sure.
Travis is the front runner. He should win it going away, in my opinion. But he should be over guys like Dylan Gabriel, Cam Ward, in my opinion. This is not a team that is unranked or sitting at the bottom of the top 25. This is a team that the college football playoff
They're number 13 in the country.
Yeah, they are a number 13 in the country with respectable wins, have an opportunity to get some more respectable wins, and that is because of Ashton Jeanty's gravity. Even if he's not running for 250, 300, everything that they can do in the passing game is predicated off of his gravity and their ability to get one-on-one matchups and be able to be creative in those concepts. So I think he should at worst be the number 2 in the odds. He should probably finish number 2 overall, in my opinion. So I think it's unfair that he's dropped below a guy like Dylan Gabriel and kind of in that middle tier with a guy like Cam Ward because I think Jeanty has performed well and above the standard that should be for Heisman.
All right, how loud did the Samuels household get this weekend when you watched Louisiana Tech and Jacksonville State? Jacksonville State brings it down to tie the game on a Hail Mary with time expiring, and they get it. They tied it at 37-37, and all they needed was an extra point, and he shanks the extra point. What the fuck, man? They ended up winning 44-37. But after the Hail Mary missing that field goal, I mean, you probably had to take some blood pressure medication.
Bro, so I was sitting here pissed off because I'm like, we're about to lose to Louisiana Tech, who is a decent team, right? They had been known for their defense coming into the game, but, the offense performed fine. Jacksonville State gets up 14 points, and then the weird turnovers start to happen. You get a fumble from Trey Stewart, who's one of the most dynamic running backs in the country. I believe he has 17 rushing touchdowns. He's up there with everybody. Then you get an interception from Tyler Huff, who's been taking care of the ball very well. And the next thing you know, Louisiana Tech's making some miraculous plays. They're going down and scoring. They're getting some momentum on defense. It's a one-possession ball game. Jacksonville State gets the ball back, have the ball. I'm like, man, there's no way this is going to happen, right? So they throw the Hail Mary. I'm screaming to the top of my lungs. My lady comes out. She's like, what's going on? What's going on? I'm like, Jacksonville State just scored. Hail Mary, y'all. So I'm all hyped up, wishing they're watching it. And then they kick the extra point, and we're like, the camera angle on CBS was a little bit weird, so you didn't know. But all I saw was Garrison Ripper, the kicker, grab his helmet.
You said, oh, shit.
And I'm like, wait, did he miss it? And then the referee comes out and does the signal, and everybody's running off the field. I'm like, oh, my God. I could not believe what I just saw. So I went from the highest sense of euphoria possible to the most visceral, sick feeling I've ever felt watching that happen. But they eventually pulled it out in overtime. They went and scored immediately. Then they went and got a stop, got a sack on the 4th down play, win that ball game, get to 6-3, 5-0 in the Conference USA, in the driver's seat for the Conference USA title. So they may end up playing Western Kentucky. If they handle business this weekend, they'll probably end up playing Western Kentucky twice.
Yeah, I was going to say, I did the math here. They need to beat Florida International. That goes without saying.
Yeah.
And Florida International gave Liberty all they could handle earlier in the year. They went to OT, so who knows? But you're at home, so it should be okay. If they beat Sam Houston State, they are locked in no matter what. If they win these next 2 games, they are locked into the Conference USA Championship. They're just waiting for whoever they're going to play, which will likely be Western Kentucky. So you could have at Western Kentucky and then play them back-to-back in the Conference USA Championship. And that's going to I dealt with that at the University of Memphis in 2019. Got to watch that. Cincinnati 2 weeks in a row. That's a tough one. That's always tough as hell to have to get 2 back-to-back games against the same opponent. It's hard to beat somebody twice.
Yeah, 100%. Florida International is a decent team. They can beat you if you're not playing your best because you just saw Louisiana Tech was good enough to beat you if you weren't playing at your best. So that was a game that a lot of people thought Jacksonville State was going to win going away. And they were dominant early in the game. And then, the crazy stuff started to happen. And you saw that. And then, you get to a situation like this against a team like Florida International that is playing for pride. They're playing for a lot. They're playing to be spoiler. I know a lot of these teams at the end of the season are going to get overlooked. But there's nothing better when you aren't having the type of year that you want than to spoil somebody else's year. So Jacksonville State has to be ready for that. Sam Houston is a much improved team. We got to talk to their offensive coordinator a couple of weeks ago. So it'd be nice to see him in a couple of weeks. But they have their opportunities there to get locked into that Conference USA game. And I'm really excited for that West Kentucky game at the end if everything goes to plan. So shout out to Jackson State. Shout out to the family over here. And stay focused, man. It's a long way to go.
All right, now game of the week in the Group of 5 ranks will be Navy at home versus number 25 Tulane. Tulane 7-point favorites in this game. I think Tulane should handle business. Navy has been sort of exposed the past few weeks. After that Notre Dame game, I think there's more film on them, and you've seen the defenses since then sort of lock down, lock in, and not allow them to be as multidimensional as they were the first few games of the year, the first half of the season. South Florida only allowed 28 points. They lost because their offense couldn't get going. They, of course, lost to Rice. Navy did 24-10. And I got to see Rice's defense this week. They're solid. I don't think they should be holding you down to 10 points. But I think Tulane can handle business, even though it's on the road. I can tell you, going to Navy, playing in Annapolis, it can get kind of, I don't know, especially at 11 a.m., 2:30 game, middle of the day. It can get like sleepy and gray, especially this time of year. It's going to be really chilly. I think that could bother Tulane, but Tulane's the better team, the more talented team.
Yeah, this was pretty straightforward for me. I think Navy has a chance. They always have a chance because of their style of play. If they're able to chew clock and make their conversions in the red zone and on third downs, they can give anybody a game. But I fully expect Tulane with their explosiveness on offense.
Yes.
Darian Minson and those guys, even a guy like Mario Williams who can give you some trouble on the outside as a matchup. Those type of players, Navy hasn't seen a ton of those. I think the only game that they've seen that type of talent would probably be the Memphis game on the outside with those type of receivers, and what we just saw them against Notre Dame. And they didn't fare well defensively in either one of those games. So if Tulane handles business, I think they're going to be too explosive offensively. But like we always said, when you play these type of teams, they have a chance if they are operating at their peak capacity.
Yeah, but Mekhi Hughes, by the way, for Tulane, I didn't want to move past this without mentioning him. He's having quietly one of the best running back seasons in the country. 1,200 yards, about a 6.0 average, 13 touchdowns. He's caught a few passes as well. He's been absolutely rolling for them. So I wanted to give him a shout out before we moved on. Now let's move on to our picks. Let's go into it. I'm going to give you my lock. And my lock of the week, I'm going to go with Kyron's ass kicking chickens. Minus the 13.5. versus Florida International. I know Kai's like sort of thinking this may be the kiss of death, but at the same time, when you look at Jacksonville State, they're near the top of the country in rush yards per game. And Florida International is actually a good pass defense, but they can't stop the run. They're 114th in the country in run defense. So I just totally expect this to be a running fiasco. I think you'll have a bunch of big explosive plays on the ground. Rich Rod is going to scheme it up. And I think that Jacksonville State's going to hang a lot of points on this team. Just a bad matchup for Florida International and their strengths versus their weaknesses.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think if they handle business, it'll be one of those games where I can add. I've been doing a little ticker for the Jacksonville State win streak here, where they're at like crazy, some 2,000 something rushing yards in the last 5 games on this win streak. They're just running over everybody. So if they're able to keep that going, I think they'll handle business. And my lock of the week is Ohio State minus 26.5 over Northwestern. I think Northwestern is a decent Power 4 level team, but with what Ohio State has on the outside and the perimeter, I think this one gets out of hand fairly early. I think they handle business, and I think they'll win this game, 42-12, 42-10 type of game. I think they're going to beat them pretty handily.
All right, now shocks. I'm actually going to listen. I'm a big Colorado fan. I grew up a Colorado fan. My dad's still a massive Colorado fan. I'm going to go with Utah plus 11.5 at Colorado. I think Colorado ultimately wins, but I think it'll be by a score or maybe a little bit less. Utah's a very good pass defense.
Yep.
And they also are pretty stout up front. They're going to try to win the time of possession battle. So, like, if Colorado doesn't take advantage of every single possession, it's going to be a close game. I wouldn't be surprised if Utah comes out on top. They're probably really pissed from the way things ended last week against BYU. But Utah's a top 25 pass defense. We know what Colorado wants to do. They want to air it out. They've gotten just enough running the ball to beat a lot of these teams. I don't think they'll be able to do that against Utah and Kyle Whittingham's group. I think this stays within a touchdown. I think Colorado ultimately wins, but I think the 11.5 is way too much. That's too much to cover for Colorado.
I like that. I think that's a prudent pick. I would say that's prudent. My shock of the week is because this goes against everything we're saying trajectory-wise. I think you're going to get the best version of Georgia this week, and I think Georgia wins this game pretty solidly. I'm going to say like a 34-17 type of contest where I think Georgia reminds people of who they are. So that'll be my shock of the week, and it's funny having Georgia in any kind of shock of the week over the last 3 or 4 years, but that's my shock of the week. I think they'll kind of surprise some people and insert their dominance again. All
right, so for my bonus, do I get to if certain injury report things get published late, do I get to change my pick? Is this? Can we set that? Or do I have to lock it in? Am I just locking it in right now?
G5 classified rules. We aren't set the any lines here, so we can bend the rules a little bit. I'm cool with that because information that you didn't have before is presented now. So as long as it's before kickoff, I'm cool with that.
Okay, so if DJ Lagway's not able to go, right? If DJ Lagway gets held out, or if we learn that, he's about 80%, I'm taking LSU by a lot. 4 does not seem like enough. 4 has to be the DJ Lagway line, DJ Lagway going line. But if Florida doesn't have him, they don't have anything. Aiden Warner is terrible. He's really bad. And I feel bad for the kid. I mean, he was a Yale transfer. He's still a freshman. He's still relatively young. But, he just doesn't have it. If he goes, LSU is going to be able to do whatever the hell they want. So I'm going to take LSU -4. But I feel like, sitting here right now on a Wednesday night recording this could change by the time we get to Saturday.
I like that. I think that's fair because, LSU is the more talented team for sure. So I like that one, and especially with the caveat that, hey, we can kind of adjust it a little bit if we're playing, and we have a dual threat quarterback that can make some things happen. But my bonus pick of the week is Oregon, Wisconsin over 51.5, and I thought about putting this as my lock, but I think I trust Ohio State's offense a little bit more. But over 51.5 is pretty much a lot for me. I mean, when you think about how dynamic Oregon's offense has been over the last, we can just say literally since the start of the season. And Wisconsin is decent enough on offense, the ball control, if they're able to establish a run. And another thing, Oregon has turned over the ball a little bit. They don't have the greatest turnover margin. They're about 44th in the country in turnover margin, which is not as high as most top teams. So they'll give you some opportunities to steal some points, kind of like Maryland did last week. Maryland was in that game in the third quarter and had some opportunities to maybe make something shake there. So I think over 51.5 is a lot based off the trajectory and the trend during the season. So that's my bonus of the week.
All right, Kai, where they find you?
Same old. Find me on Twitter, X, whatever you call it now, at Kyron Samuels, and you'll have everything else. Have a lot of cool stuff dropping. USC and Oregon are who I cover for Sports Illustrated, but Dana Holgorsen, a very familiar name, has been hired as the offensive coordinator for Nebraska. So this week we're going to get a Lincoln Riley versus Dana Holgorsen offensive duel with both of their backs against the wall. I think this is a program shifting game for both of these teams. If Nebraska is able to win this game and get to 6-4 and kind of make some things happen and finish 8-4, this is going to be important for them. But if USC goes to 4-6, with the investments that they've had in their program, they just broke ground on a new facility. They invested all this money into the coaching staff and in their players. We might see some shakeups coming for USC as well. So this is a very important game. I wrote all about that. Catch us there, man. Like, share, subscribe. I'll be on the radio with Gabe tomorrow, 92.9 ESPN Memphis. And appreciate you guys for tuning in for another episode.
Yeah, my guy Dana, he'll never go away. He ain't never going to go away.
Never.
That man's like a cat. He's got 9 lives. But follow me at G_Coon71. Go to 929ESPN.com. Check out all of my work Monday through Friday, 4 to 7. And also make sure you go check out my other podcast releases every single Tuesday at noon on the Bluff Podcast. But make sure you follow and like and subscribe all the podcasts we have over at Bluff City Media. Go to bluffcitymedia.co to check out all the articles and the podcasts there. But just go ahead and do that. Go ahead and do that. And we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of G5 Classified. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a rating and a review wherever you download your podcasts. To watch this episode, head over to the Bluff City Media YouTube channel. We'll see you back here next week.